Are you looking to take the next step toward investing in commercial real estate but don't know where to go? CRE Central offers a comprehensive education and coaching platform designed to help you get started. Our online courses cover a wide range of topics, from the fundamentals to advanced strategies, ensuring you have the knowledge and skills needed to thrive in this competitive industry. As a member, you'll gain access to our exclusive online community and monthly group coaching calls, providing you with valuable networking opportunities and personalized guidance from experienced professionals. Whether you're a beginner or looking to take your career to the next level, CRE Central has the resources you need. Visit www.crecentral.com to learn more. Welcome back to the Commercial Real Estate Investor Podcast for another Brokers Roundtable. Today, Chad and I are going to be diving into part 2 of what every business needs to know before signing a lease. Last time, we ended up spending half an hour talking about just the first section of like literally 8 sections that we had down to dive into. Let's talk about today, Chad. We'll kick it off with lease structures. There's, basically 3 different lease structures that are common in commercial real estate. I mean, of course, industrial has its own lease and, you can modify these in kind of any way. But the 3 most common are full service gross, modified gross, and triple net. What should a tenant want if they're going to be leasing commercial real estate? Do they want full service where everything's just all included in one rate? Do they want, triple net where, they're going to have to pay, the common area maintenance, property taxes, building insurance, all of that kind of stuff? What do tenants want?
I think at the core, tenants want what they can't have. And I don't say that flippantly, but I say it from the standpoint that all tenants want, they want convenience, they want to be clarity, they want consistency, they want everything that a landlord would find impossible to deliver. Because a landlord, especially if it's a longer term lease, if a tenant's doing a very short-term deal like a month-to-month or a year-to-year, it might be possible that a landlord would actually do a full gross lease where they're not passing through any increases in expenses, and they might just say, here's your rent, it's $10,000 a month. That includes property tax, insurance, and everything. But that, if you go beyond a year, a landlord just can't predict what's going to happen to those expenses because we don't know what's going to happen with property taxes. We don't know what landscaping costs are going to be. We don't know what all those expenses are. So a landlord the best they can do is make an estimate. So even on the full service gross, it's more common from what I've seen for landlords to still have a base year in there. So it's gross. They might be paying $10,000 a month, but there's probably a provision that there's a base year where all numbers get adjusted based on that base year. So if there is a increase in property taxes or insurance or any operating level expense for the building, then that does get pushed through to the tenant. But I understand why tenants want certainty. They don't want to get hit with a bill at the end of the year saying, we estimated that the cost to operate this building would be X, and it turned out to be X plus some amount. So now you owe us the difference. That's probably the most frustrating thing that I hear from companies, especially new companies that aren't familiar with commercial leases, is they get blindsided by a reconciliation at the end of the year once a landlord has figured out what their actual expenses were. So that's why where I say tenants want something that they just can't have. A tenant would rightfully want to have full certainty and know exactly what their bills are, but unless it's a very short-term lease, it's impossible to deliver.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, most tenants don't think that they actually want a triple net lease because they're looking at it going, well, why am I going to pay base rent and then pay all of these additional expenses? But you're actually paying those in a full service gross lease. I actually think that tenants benefit more from the triple net lease structure than they do from a full service lease structure for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, it's holding the landlord accountable, right? So you know exactly what is going on with regards to the common area maintenance, property taxes, and building insurance. In a full-service gross lease, landlords can get tempted, bad landlords, and there's a lot of them out there, to cut expenses in order to keep more of the profit that's coming in. They don't have any obligations necessarily to keep the building up and running outside of what's already in the lease, and they can kind of skirt around a lot of that. Whereas in a triple net lease, if the landlord starts cutting their expenses on common area maintenance, well, I as the tenant am going to get a reimbursement at the end of the year because I've overpaid for my cam now, and I get to audit you as the landlord. Adam, let's dive into what your thoughts are on the full service versus modified gross versus triple net lease structures.
It's really rare in my world to do anything other than triple net. So and honestly, like it happens very rarely that, let's say, a large landlord has a huge asset and it's, pick a number, 300,000 square feet, and the retail is only 8,000 square feet of it, something like that. Sometimes they will just kind of pick an arbitrary market cam number and build in yearly increases just to, frankly, not have to figure it out and track it, because it's kind of the tail wagging the dog. But and even that is usually set up as a triple net lease. So the big things in my world, again, you guys know I kind of wear both hats, right? Sometimes I represent the landlord, sometimes I represent the tenant. The things that I usually find to be just kind of a middle of the fairway, everybody get along kind of scenario is capping a non-controllable cam on a yearly basis. Now, what is that cap? Obviously, you're going to negotiate that, but that can help a tenant not just get smashed with these huge runaway costs. And Tyler, you say you've seen bad landlords. I would never say that any of my landlords would do anything like this. Obviously, they're pure as the driven snow, but some people just use CAM as a massive margin tool, especially if you're talking about less sophisticated tenants that don't understand those audit rights and don't understand, maybe they don't have in-house accounting and things like that. So that's usually something we use to keep everybody accountable, is just the ability to not let these costs just double in a year.
Yeah, I completely agree. Adam, I'd be curious to hear your opinion on why you think retail, like it is so staunchly triple net. Yeah. And why, another asset class like office, and maybe Jesse could touch on this afterwards, is so staunchly full service gross. Now that's starting to change. We're starting to see office structures very different than we used to 10 years ago. But there's kind of a dichotomy there. Yeah,
one simple reason I think that everything in retail skews triple net is, think about we have a Verizon store in Suite A, right? And we have a dog washing salon in Suite B. And then we have a restaurant in Suite C. The amount of utilities that are used in those three scenarios are so wildly different that's one reason why it's just easier to keep everything triple net, everything sub-metered, and just keep it simple, stupid. I think that's one of the big things. Janitorial really isn't a big thing in retail as well. So you start stripping out utilities, you start stripping out janitorial. There's not a lot of core in a retail center, right? Unless you're paying core for parking garage, things like that. So it's just not as it's not as important in retail, I guess, or it's just a different way to look at it. The other thing that I see landlords and tenants get in trouble is trying to do a triple net lease and then trying to lease on leasable square footage that has the core built into it. That's a big no-no in my world. I want the rights to BOMA measure that space to make sure that if you're saying it's 2,000 square feet, it doesn't have some kind of 10 or 15% core factor built into it. Oh, and you're going to charge me $10 a foot in triple nets. So
because you're double dipping.
That's right. So I've argued that vociferously before, and it's hard to defend, frankly.
I love that word, vociferously. Jesse, what about you?
No, it's a weird one.
For us, I would say the lion's share, 90% plus of the deals we do are triple net deals. I think sometimes you think you have a semi-gross lease, and then when you actually go into the lease document, the nuts and bolts of it, there's technically a base and additional. So you have to kind of watch out for that. I would say the only time we typically will do what we would call semi-gross, which would just be basically gross, but not including utilities and janitorial. The only time I do that is for subleases, just to keep it simple, because typically the term is going to be shorter, and the sub landlord is not a professional landlord. So if I'm representing them, I'll just say it'll just be an easier payment, flat rate every month. And then on the flip side, if I'm representing the tenant, sometimes I'll just go in for a semi-gross or modified gross lease in a sublease scenario. But yeah, I'd say 95% plus it's triple net for us.
Yeah, the base rent expense stop was a really interesting curveball to me when I was first getting started in commercial real estate, because I was like, wait, I don't understand how you figured this thing out at all. Because it's basically a full service gross triple net lease, which is hilarious to say, but that's like exactly what it is. Because, it's a great way for landlords who are dealing with less sophisticated tenants to get around that confuse you lose type of thing when you're dealing with triple net structures, right? Because tenants are always like, well, I don't get it. Why am I paying a base rent plus additional rent? And, if you're doing that kind of, well, hey, the first year it's $5,000 a month. The next year we'll figure it out. Most of them have no issues with that. So that's interesting. Yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the lease structure is. Just make sure that you are getting an attorney to review the lease and that you are protected and that it makes sense.
One thing I'd say is where you make sure you protect yourself on the additional rent piece. We always try, well, first of all, it's the M in TMI. That's usually the one where you could have management fees buried into there. Sometimes you'll have a realty fee on top of a management fee. So you're basically paying for somebody to write a property tax check. The other thing we typically do, depending on the market, is we'll put controls on the increase in additional rent. Usually landlords are not going to just say yes to that, but you can push back and say controllable operating expenses. So not your taxes. Your taxes go up, they go up, but it could be insurance. So basically having a cap on certain things that are controllable so that you're not just getting those costs balloon year after year.
Yep, I love it. Let's talk about some of the key terms and conditions that tenants need to be paying attention to as they are signing these leases. As we said before in part one, every commercial real estate lease is negotiable. If you are working on a commercial real estate lease, almost every aspect of that is negotiable. There are some parts of it that a landlord will not and cannot move on for good reasons. But that's why you need to have a good commercial real estate attorney to walk you through this. Adam, we'll start with you. Things like rent and escalation clauses, the length of the lease, security deposits, operating expenses. We talked about caps on CAM. What are some of the most important clauses you feel like as, a retail tenant rep, you guys are having to pay attention to?
On the tenant side, I mean, it really comes down to guarantees and credit, right? Because a lot of our deals are very long term. It's rare, very rare, that I do a deal that's less than 5 years. Honestly, the lion's share of deals that I do are 10-year and then 2 5-year options, typically at a set rate. Institutional landlords always push for fair market value increases on the options. Tenants always push to know kind of what they're paying. So that guarantee piece really becomes massive when you're talking about a potential 10 or 20-year relationship. So that's one thing that we always end up going back and forth on ad nauseum. Increases, it's easy to agree to 3, 4, or 5% annual increases because the number looks so small when you see that 3, and then you do the compounding math over 10 years, especially now prime retail space in Charlotte, triple net can be $50 plus, even $60 plus triple net. So you start talking about 3% annuals on that, that gets pretty salty pretty quick. I'd love to hear some of the other guys talk about hot buttons in their world, but I mean, retail can get so nuanced down to trade dress and signage and view corridors, and I mean, it's brutal. How nuanced. I mean, especially if you do like a mall lease and a triple net, or a mixed use lease. I mean, these things are good sized coffee table books and cost tens and tens of thousands of dollars to negotiate. So I could put everybody to sleep with all the little quirks that I've seen over the years.
Yeah, that was the funny thing. When I first got started, I was working for a developer that had a retail portfolio, office, industrial, and of course, as the sole in-house leasing agent, I had to be the one to pour through all of these leases and figure out what the hell was going on.
That's what
And
attorney. Yeah.
oh yeah, but they were like, hey, yeah, attorneys are going to do this, but you're the broker. You need to read through this and understand exactly what's going on, right? Which, oh man, the office leases super boring, but relatively straightforward. We're talking like 15 to 20 pages. The industrial leases were even simpler. And we didn't have like manufacturing or anything like that. Like once you get into manufacturing and some other, aspects of industrial, it gets way more complicated. But damn, the 10, 15, 20-year leases that we had for national tenant retailers in the shopping centers were insane. The amount of things that went into that, I can't imagine how much they had to spend.
Yeah, it's brain
anyway.
And you see big tenants start to push back. I mean, you have groups like, for instance, large groups that sell coffee that shall remain nameless. I mean, they will beat you to death on deals and terms, and then they'll throw things at you like kick out clauses and sales thresholds and things that can drastically affect your ability to sell these things on the investment market. So yeah, it can get pretty wild.
Yeah, that's always been interesting to me. We've tried to work with a probably the very same big coffee dealer before, and
could be anybody.
It could be anyone. There's multiple, but they have like a 2-3 year kickout clause, and you're like, the entire reason we're doing this is because we're going to build it and sell it. I can't sell that. That's not a sellable asset. Nobody's going to want to buy that. Jesse, let's go over to you, man. What about an office space? What do you want to pay attention to when you're looking at those leases?
So, I mean, very similar to industrial, I think, and it depends on what your tenant's doing. So, for instance, like we've heard on the retail side, there's a lot that goes into upfront costs and money that goes into the space. It really depends with office today trending towards turnkey space, basically delivered, ready to go. Sometimes that's with furniture. For us, the major ones are, like we just talked about with additional rent, making sure that the increases, escalations are reasonable. Like we just talked about here, 3-4% year after year starts getting really crazy when you start going into years 5 to 10. So we want to make sure that the caps, the escalations are market. When it comes to deposits, it really is a function of the covenant of your tenant. So I like to be as upfront representing the tenant as quickly as possible. So even though you might have to wait till a due diligence phase to actually provide financials for your client, if we can get that out of the way in the beginning so that we don't get so far down the road and then all of a sudden you have a landlord, instead of asking for 2 months, they're asking for 4 or 5 months of prepaid rent or anything else, basically, now that they've seen the financials of the tenant. Aside from that, the major deal terms that we would typically look for in terms of the rental rates, a big thing right now is free rent. Some landlords are willing to do that in term. A lot of them aren't in our market. So that would be, if you have a 5-year deal and you want 4 or 5 months of free rent, that they're tacking that on so that they're not messing around with their net effective rents in term. So just little things like that to kind of make sure that you have covered, and then understanding exactly what is not covered in the lease. So we talked a little bit about this, but janitorial, hydro, all that stuff adds up. So making sure that you understand what you are paying, and how many of our tenants are just like, just tell me what my full monthly cost is. So peeling at that long lease and figuring out what is the actual outlay for them.
Yeah, there's so much of that can be hidden in those leases.
That's one note that I think is worth talking about. Just that, like, give me my monthly nut kind of question. We see, I think that there's a really cool opportunity in the market for kind of smaller maker spaces. And Tyler, I'm sure you see more of it in Nashville, but there's not a lot of people that do it. I really like it. and you're able to do these little 700 to 1100 square foot boxes. You white box everything. Obviously, it's done in food halls all the time. And you're just giving out these like simple, streamlined 6-month or 1-year leases. And it's not even like per square foot. It's like, here's your nut. Here's how much it is a month. You know, we're not going to spend 20 grand negotiating this lease, because if you fail, you know, it's very strict on what you can do with the space. And I've got a line of people waiting to get in, because there's not much like this in the market. I think that's something that, you know, is an opportunity both on the lease side and on the development side that we just don't see a lot of yet in Charlotte. And the things that we do have, you know, they get snapped up. I mean, little 1,000 square foot second gen white box deal in a good location in Charlotte is not on the market very long. So I've seen some institutional even landlords get comfortable with that kind of scenario, because it's not this like huge capital outlay risk every time they sign a deal. So, you know, what's my monthly, you know, what's included, keep it simple, stupid. Where do I sign?
That's funny. I mean, you couldn't have teed me up better, because that's exactly what the wash was, right? I mean, that's 6 bays, 400 square feet each. We had an all-in gross number and kind of a base expense stop type of deal. And we've got 30 restaurants on the wait list, because we did it turnkey. You know, we provided the hood vent, the grease trap, the 3-compartment sink, and the walk-in coolers. And so because of that, I mean, you know, when I first like started pitching it to brokers to bring us tenants, we ended up working with 0 brokers on this deal, which is kind of wild. All the restaurants just called us directly. So there's something to be said there as a landlord or a landlord rep. When you work on these smaller deals, you're probably double ending both ends of the commission. But the brokers that I talked to, they were like, we're not, that's 3 times market rate per square foot. We're not bringing that. And I was like, yeah, but you're looking at it the wrong way. You're looking at it on a per square foot basis, which doesn't make any sense. This is 400 square feet. Here's what it is all in every month. That's all the business cares about. And that was all that people cared about. We had 6 leases signed in 2 weeks. So, I mean, everything Adam said is absolutely right. If you do these micro units, they work really well. Chad, before we get to you, man, I realized that we completely dropped the ball on announcing the giveaway today. Should we do the giveaway today, or should we save it for next week?
Well, I got it right here, so let's I think we should do it.
Let's do it today. So, Chad, tell everybody what they could be given.
I see if my camera will focus on it or not, because if I put it too close, it might not go. This is a custom Lego factory that I had designed by a professional Lego designer. So it's the Fagus factory in Germany, built in 1913, still looks as badass today as it did 110 years ago. I kind of wanted to have this partly as like something to give away. Like, I think it'd be a cool gift. I've had people that have already wanted to know how they could buy it. I'm not selling it. I just am an industrial real estate nerd. This building is actually on the UNESCO World Heritage Site as well. So this is like a world famous building. In Germany, it's very popular. In industrial real estate nerd circles like I run in, it's popular. So I've got the manual for it. The designer that I hired made a professional manual. I followed it. It was super easy to do. It's pretty big. Like, you can get a sense of the scale on it. And it's super detailed. Like, he did an awesome job on it. So cool. Yeah, I think we should give one away.
Yeah, we'll give it away today. All you have to do to enter the giveaway is just drop a comment or a question in the live chat, and we will tally you up here at the end. I'll do a little screen share. We'll share the little selector wheel at random and give it away today.
The guy that called us idiots in the comments.
Yeah, I
deleted that guy.
I was wondering if you guys saw that, because I deleted it and banned him. I was like, I don't have time to deal with that today.
Like, he needs to get some energy out somehow.
Yeah. If you're listening on the podcast, somebody dropped in the live chat 4 idiots. I'm not going to read the second part. That's
the nicest thing I've been called today.
Yeah, there's too much that goes into that. Chad, tell us about industrial leases, man. What do people need to pay attention to?
What I've found on industrial is that the level of sophistication on either side, and I suppose this is similar in retail as well, really drives that narrative. If it's a small local landlord, they probably use a very straightforward template lease. If it's a large institutional landlord, they're probably using something that was developed by a top law firm, and it's elaborate. And to that extent, I've seen industrial leases be anywhere from 10 pages to 80 pages. And you could appreciate as you go that much higher in the lease, it just covers a lot more. And I think that that's the risk that smaller and unsophisticated tenants and landlords have, is it's not necessarily so much what's included, but what's not included. Because if the lease is silent on an issue, it can cause all sorts of problems. And just a couple that come to mind: an option to renew. If there's no option to renew, if it just isn't in there, then the tenant could theoretically be kicked out of the space at the end of the lease. If there's no right of first refusal, if there's no option to sublease, there might be case law on that. There might be some areas where even if it is silent on that, there still might be some precedent. But if it's not explicitly mentioned in the lease, then that could be having to go to court to determine if the tenant has the legal right to sublease that space. And the option to sublease, usually it's provided the landlord can't unreasonably withhold consent. It's usually some language like that in there. But if it's missing all of that, then it's a potential problem if that issue comes up and it's silent on it. One that I've seen recently as well, which is more specific to industrial, not one that's common in retail or office necessarily, or at least the problems don't manifest, is environmental issues. So if it's a clean warehousing tenant, it's probably fine. There's very low risk of contamination. But if it's a manufacturing company, like a medium or heavy industrial use, there's a reasonably good chance that there could be contamination at the end of the lease. It's not guaranteed, but there's at least a chance of it. So what some sophisticated landlords are doing is they're requiring a tenant to actually go and perform a standardized test at the beginning of the lease to show that there's no contamination, or at least any indication of contamination. And then they also want to have an environmental site assessment done at the end of the lease to establish that they didn't create any contamination during that period. That becomes very tense, and it can cause a lot of problems, and it can bottleneck deals and cause deals to collapse altogether, because now tenants are having to indemnify the landlord for things that might not even be in their scope. So it gets very messy. You want to start going down a rabbit hole, talk to an environmental lawyer on all the issues that can come up and how they actually trace it and how they can pinpoint it to one specific user and who's liable. That in itself is infinitely complex. So if landlords start trying to incorporate language into the lease, tenants, especially ones that might not be sophisticated, can be putting themselves on a pretty big hook where it might be very expensive and litigious to get out of it. So I think that underscores what we talk about often, is that every situation is different. There's a lot of intricacies. It's very complex. That to think somebody would negotiate a lease without having a lawyer and a broker comment on it is unfathomable to me. And one extra comment on that as well, because I had this discussion with someone the other day. I think a lease can really be broken down into two sections. You've got a section for all the business terms or the financial terms, and then the other section for the non-financial terms. And perhaps that gets into insurance or subrogation or any of the other things that go generally beyond business terms. I think brokers should be negotiating the financial terms, and they should be very careful about talking about any non-financial terms. And a lawyer should be negotiating the non-financial terms, but should also be very careful if they're talking about the financial terms, because a lawyer just isn't going to be up to speed on what the market is. And if they start interjecting and proposing that this lease rate might be too high, or this is uncommon in a lease, they're now holding themselves out to be a market expert. And if they are, great. I think could be a great value add. But for the same reason, a broker shouldn't be commenting on some of these complex terms like an insurance clause or a waiver of subrogation. Brokers should be very stay in their own lane and avoid holding themselves out as lawyers. So I think that's why a broker and a lawyer should really be involved in that process. And somebody that tries to go through that process without either of them, they're opening themselves up for a whole bunch of risk.
Well
I think
said.
that is, yeah, I think that's such a good point. I mean, first of all, as a broker, why would you ever want to get involved in negotiating the insurance clause, right? Like, hey, that's another clause I get to skip over in the lease. I'm going to go focus on the fun stuff, right? But it's very true. Like, you know, as a tenant, as a business that is going to sign a lease, your broker is not the end all be all. They will help connect you to everyone, but they cannot negotiate. They shouldn't be negotiating the lease on your behalf. They are not attorneys. They cannot give you legal advice, nor should you be taking legal advice from them, unless, you know, it's a broker attorney, in which case you found a unicorn. It's very important that you just do that the right way. Guys, thanks for diving into everything today. We'll go ahead and call it a day. Next time we'll be diving into due diligence during the lease, what you need to be doing before you sign the lease, and also diving into the background of your landlord and property management companies so you know exactly who you are getting into bed with. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so that we can get to the picker wheel. That way it looks totally unbiased and has nothing to do with me. It doesn't look like the picker wheel is necessarily showing up. Is that right?
It was there for a second.
What in the world is going on?
We'll have to go back to the really biased. Oh, there it is.
There it is. I was just going to have to pick somebody. It was going to be my favorite friend that said we were all 4 idiots. Let's see who wins the Lego plans. Which is pretty cool. Chad, I'm going to have to buy some of those from you because that's pretty awesome. Vicken has been jumping in all of my live streams lately and commenting just about every time. So Vicken, glad you got to win that. Shoot me a DM. I'll get you connected with Chad and we can take it from there. Guys, thank you for joining me as always. Appreciate having you all here, and we'll see y'all in the next one.
See you guys next week.
Thanks.
Are you looking to take the next step toward investing in commercial real estate but don't know where to go? CRE Central offers a comprehensive education and coaching platform designed to help you get started. Our online courses cover a wide range of topics, from the fundamentals to advanced strategies, ensuring you have the knowledge and skills needed to thrive in this competitive industry. As a member, you'll gain access to our exclusive online community and monthly group coaching calls, providing you with valuable networking opportunities and personalized guidance from experienced professionals. Whether you're a beginner or looking to take your career to the next level, CRE Central has the resources you need. Visit www.crecentral.com to learn more.